Welcome to Markets Now. I'm Michelle Rook with Allison Thompson of the Money Farm, and we see livestock pointing mostly higher except for deferred hogs. Over in the grain trade, it's a mixed session. Row crops higher, wheat maybe just slightly lower. And Allison, I got to ask you, corn market has been beat up here. We hit 3-year lows. Do you think that this bounce this morning, are we trying to bottom, or is that just some short covering?
Yeah, well, it's really hard to know. It's also a holiday week here this week, so we do normally see some lighter volume coming in. So I can't really prove anything else than short covering here to start this week. We haven't seen any fundamental changes. Obviously, we saw big fundamentals last week, but we haven't seen anything change drastically since those reports. So, in my opinion, we're just seeing a round of short covering, but with the funds also being on large short positions here, seeing anything more than just short covering, we're closely watching resistance levels. And especially on a week like this, when you're starting to see, some lighter volume, those things do become pretty important.
Yeah, talk about resistance on the corn here. Where do you see it on the charts for the new crop?
Yes. Well, looking at the new crop contract, we actually are pushing against it here this morning. That 425 area seems to be a good area of resistance, but pushing through that and possibly getting into that 440 area would definitely maybe prove that we're seeing a little bit more than some short covering happening. On the soybean side, there too, we're kind of pushing against our resistance levels here this morning, getting into that 1125 area. Pushing against there and getting into those 1130s might prove a little bit differently. And also on the spring wheat, we actually saw a really good rally yesterday. Not seeing quite the follow through this morning, but we're not giving it all back, which is a good thing, I guess, for wheat. But seeing probably in all three wheat exchanges another 20 cents higher we could do. And after yesterday's trade, it definitely proves that those levels can be hit in a day. So just another thing to keep an eye on here as we go through the rest of the week.
But if we get through those areas with the funds as short as they are, if you have a weather issue, this thing, maybe there's a little more gas in the tank to push higher, you think?
Yes, absolutely. A rally is definitely going to be weighed on by weather and what we think with production concerns moving forward. Obviously, the USDA didn't give us very much of a friendly report across the board last week. So it goes back to weather and what the trade is feeling as far as production concerns. Even if the USDA doesn't print it, are they going to start out weighing that by what producers are reporting? And again, we've had some pretty volatile weather across the Midwest, and that isn't settling down. So with that, it comes to a point of whether the USDA is going to print something. And again, we have a USDA report next week. So there's a possibility that they could, but I'm not banking on it. So it kind of goes to when the trade feels there's going to be something changing, or the funds finally do get spooked and think things are going to change. So those are the things we're watching. And if they do, we could see a very fast and furious exit. We could see a substantial rally when that time does come.
Well, hopefully farmers can take advantage of that because being down at 3-year lows in both corn and soybeans here, that's a tough pill to swallow. The other thing that's tough to swallow as a pill is the weather situation because we've got flooding in the northwestern corn belt. Crop doesn't look good there, but yet you've got the eastern corn belt receiving rain, and that's kind of trumping what's going on in the other areas of the corn belt.
Yeah, it's two extremes that we're seeing play out. And there hasn't been a year in recent history where we've seen two different sides of the Corn Belt to this extent, with the severe flooding further south. And again, they're looking at more rain here just in the next couple of days and going into the holiday week. And even up here in my area, we're looking at some more rain entering the forecast as well. And we're by no means dry, but we don't necessarily need the moisture here either. So how it plays out on what production does between the two areas, again, the eastern part, they're looking at actually getting some more moisture as well, maybe alleviating some of those conditions. And again, it just goes back into weather. We're seeing our first hurricane actually pop up for the season, and where that brings moisture is going to play into it. Are we going to see an active hurricane season bringing a lot of moisture into the Midwest, or are we going to see things actually change? But given this year on how we've seen some drastic shutoffs in weather and switches and conditions, it wouldn't be surprising to see that eventually come into play. But as of right now, it's just not in the near-term forecast.
Yeah. So, Allison, with the pullback that I talked about, 3-year lows in corn and beans, are you surprised we had a little bit of export business this morning to Colombia? Are you surprised we aren't seeing more demand come at the market?
Yeah, no, it's been really slow. And especially like you said, being at 3-year lows, we should be seeing some type of business come in. And it wouldn't be surprising to see some more maybe start to pop up, especially on that weekly export sales report. Just because we aren't seeing them daily doesn't mean that they're not happening. We just need a certain threshold of 100,000 metric tons to actually come through on the daily system. So they could be buying some smaller amounts throughout the week, especially at these levels. So I think that's another thing we need to keep an eye on is just more so that weekly report on what's actually going through rather than just necessarily on a daily basis. But don't get me wrong, the market loves to see some activity on a daily basis because they're big sales and obviously it adds up. But I think we're also still watching what water levels do. Obviously, that could have an impact on exports and things like that going forward as well. So there are some things definitely moving pieces here that we should be watching as far as exports go. But I do like the outlook so far. I think with prices the way they are, given global production concerns, not just here, but a lot of other places as well, we're definitely a lot more competitive on the global marketplace than we were a few months ago.
Absolutely. Wheat market, we're a little bit lower this morning after a big update yesterday, so not a lot of follow through. I'm not going to count it out yet, but do you think that market has bottomed at least?
I do. Seasonally, we do see the wheat markets print a bottom in this time frame, and it usually kind of coincides with the uptick in the winter wheat harvest. Once that reaches that 50% point, we typically do see a rally across the wheat. And that's not atypical, especially after yesterday confirming that we are at 54% complete for winter wheat harvest. So if we do see, a good bump here, I think it's just because we've kind of gotten through those harvest lows. And with that, we do see the trade really start to shift to global weather concerns and global production concerns and supply concerns moving forward. And there's no shortage of those in the wheat market. It's just going back to those other headlines that we've been hearing. Russia, Ukraine still remain pretty dry. Australia is dealing with some wet conditions. The EU is dealing with some wet conditions. Up here, we're dealing with some wetness too for our spring wheat and also up into Canada as well. So we're not short of concerns. And I think the market's just going to re-see that and hopefully take us again to some of these resistance levels, if not beyond, if we can see some more than short covering happening.
Gotcha. And let's finally talk about the cattle market. A little setback yesterday, but then we were reminded with the record cash of, the fact that these numbers continue to be tight, and so that's kind of pulled us back higher again, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's good to see. Cash obviously remains very strong, and that's going to lead where futures go. Ultimately, it seemed like the last, couple of days we were dwindling down, but I think they were kind of anticipating that we'd see some kind of cash ease back here, especially going into a seasonal trend of seeing lighter cash as we get into the later summer. But that hasn't been the case, so it needs to still keep up with it. And again, with prices the way they are, I just reiterate that guys need to be hedging their needs here and hedging these prices because they aren't going to last forever and eventually it will change. But as of right now, you really need to be protecting your bottom line.
Yeah. And it's been a wild weather spring for you guys into summer in North Dakota and much of the upper Midwest, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has been definitely a volatile year, especially with the winter we had. It was so dry and not a lot of snow, which is not usual for us. But it really turned this spring. It really got wet, and obviously it led to some planting issues. And we've been relatively wet ever since. Just timely rains coming through, but now we're also seeing some severe storms enter the area. And actually, just north of me had a pretty big system come through just this past weekend. It's about 5 miles wide and went for about 36 miles and has some really destructive hail. I've been hearing reports of somewhere around that 70% of the crops in those areas are completely gone. So it's been pretty devastating in our area, especially now that we're a few days past. You can really see the damage that was done. And obviously, even outside of that area, there's been some hit and miss spots with hail as well, and some extremely heavy rains that have definitely caused some more drowned out. So we're by no means out of the woods yet. We'll see what the rest of the year can do. But overall, it'd be really nice to get some hotter days up here. We definitely use it for the corn and the beans, but the wheat is really thriving also, though, in this cooler and damp weather. The spring wheat crop does look very nice up here. outside of some of those troubled areas, but overall the wheat's starting to head and the crop does look really nice.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Allison Thompson, with the Money Farm That Is Markets Now.